welcome back to the SBK Betting Podcast, a Newbury special. And Newbury host a 1,000 and 2,000 Guineas trial this weekend in the shape of the Fred Darling and the Greenham Stakes. And we're going to have a look at those, preview them. And we're also going to have a look at this stage with only 2 weeks to go to the big races, the two classics. And we're going to have a Ante Post selection from Ross Millar and James Millman, who join me as always. No Tom Collins, he's been allowed off on holiday, but we will have him back soon enough. But Ross and James trusted with their selections as we return to focus on the flat. So very big hello to Ross and to James. And we're going to start, as I said, with Saturday's racing, the Fred Darling Stakes, which takes place at 2:25, run over 7 furlongs at Newbury. The ground is currently good, but it's pretty warm at the moment, so I wonder if it might get a lot quicker for these fillies. This race was won by Alcohol Free last year, who got a bit unbalanced wrong side of the track in the 1,000 Guineas itself, but went on to become a dual Group 1 winner. So this race has come up, throwing up some quality in the past. Whether it's a 1,000 Guineas winner, we'll we'll have to see what the guys think. But the betting as it stands, Wild Beauty is the 2-1 favourite for Godolphin. Jumbly is 7-2. Shara is 5-1. Majestic Glory, Nazanin, and Perfect News all 7-1. 10-1 bigger the rest. James, I'll start with you first. As I said, I had to go back a long way to even find a filly who's ran in this race and then gone on to win the Guineas. I wonder if you can go back in your mind and remember who it is, because didn't come off the top of my head, but it does always throw up, as I say, a filly with quality that will go on for better things throughout the season. So how do you think that this field sums up at this stage?
Well, I've always viewed it as a weak race to get black type for some of these fillies. Generally, it's not that strong. Last year was actually an exception. I think there was a massive field and it was a pretty strong contest. This time around, it does look like that Charlie Appleby, whose horses are absolutely flying at the start of the year, they've hit the ground running. Wild Beauty, she's a solid favourite. She's, you mentioned 2-1. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if she went on to win, because she progressed with every start last year. And while she's not a 1,000 Guineas winner in my mind, she's a horse that could certainly win at this level. Group 3 and not having any penalties for last year's Group 1 win over in America. How strong that was, I'm not too sure, because she's been beaten by both Inspiral at Sandown and Majestic Glory at Newmarket. But she deserves to be favourite. Jumbly, she didn't do much wrong last year. The only time she had a real tough test, she came up short behind Hello You at Newmarket. So I'm going to look at the ones that are very much likely raced. We've got 2 once race individuals, Shara for the Gosdens, who won by a neck at Yarmouth, and another Yarmouth winner, which is slightly less fashionable, but Jane Chapel-Hyam's Heat of the Moment was very impressive at 33-1 when beating Favourite Child at Yarmouth. That individual had a lot of experience under her belt, Favourite Child, and she was actually second in a listed race on her next start. So I think that was a really good debut. We've seen Jane Chapel-Hyam with Saffron Beach last year, who ran an absolute cracker in the 1,000, and Claymore was second to Native Trail today, having had 1 win, 1 run as a juvenile. So I think Jane's got a really good squad in her hands. I think Heat at the Moment could be overpriced, a nice each way angle when Wild Beauty sets a solid standard and is our most likely winner. But looking at the prices, I thought Heat at the Moment could be very interesting.
Okay, 10-1 about this filly, Heat at the Moment for you. Also, pedigree wise, I know you like looking at this type of thing, especially fillies going 2 into 3 by Bobby's Kitten. Does she look on breeding, suggests that this trip 7 furlongs is right for her, and she could develop into, could even be further than that?
Well, you look at the owner, Kirsten Rousing, and you're kind of thinking of Sir Mark Prescott 2-mile boats that are a little bit on the slow side sometimes, but it's quite a speedy pedigree. And Bobby's Kitten, as usual, supported one of her own sires, and the mare Heat of the Night, most of her performance is 6 to a mile. So trip-wise is fine. I think will improve visually. It looked like 7-7 would suit last time. The penny really dropped inside the final furlong, and I do think that it just certainly see out 7 well. Probably not as strong a stayer as some of the horses you see in these colours, but yeah, 7s would be a nice starting point for this one season.
The same colours as Sandrine as well, who will be, I'd imagine, heading to the 1,000 Guineas as well. A big profile filly for Kirsten Rousing last year, and again by Bobby's Kitten, her own sire too. Ross, I know you love pedigrees, love looking at, thinking at those fillies who could develop into horses that potentially will get further than this. A lot of them might have been campaigned over 6 furlongs and shorter than 7 furlongs. So it's an ask for a filly at this time of the year as well. I always think it's fascinating to see, who's developed. I think James has touched on a really good point about Charlie Appleby's horses getting off to a really big start. And we've seen this at Newmarket this week. They've just been a lot more forward than others. Do you think that puts Wild Beauty in a stronger position looking at this race?
I think it does, but I entirely concur with what James said, and that she's not a superstar. She might well be good enough to win this, because I think he's right. It's not the strongest renewal, but I took a very similar tack to him, and I want to oppose Wild Beauty and Jumbly. Wild Beauty for the reasons he's mentioned. Jumbly, the only time she was beaten the ground was soft, and I just was good. She likes soft ground. Let's get this right. I just wonder whether this quicker ground could just find her out. So again, the one I came down on entirely unexposed is Roger Varian's Miss Carol Ann. She was really impressive on debut at Newmarket, bombed out at Newbury on soft ground behind Jumbly, but she travelled like the best filly in the race for large parts of that. And then when she came off the bridle, she found nothing. Finished very tired, finished very weakly. If you can put that down to the ground, and it was getting in towards October and the weather's changing, and that can really affect the fillies, particularly when they're just 2 years old. If you could put a line through that, I would like her chances back on good ground. I think she's got a profile of a horse that could make up into a smart performer. Kingman's generally come forward as 3-year-olds. He gets his 2-year-old winners, but I think they do develop on into their 3-year-old year. And the dam is from a family, Summerhand and Eastern Impact, who have all done their best work as they've got older. So in a race that I think is very much and should be viewed as a viewing tool and watch and look for the signs of fillies that have come on, the fillies that perhaps haven't developed, she was an interesting one for me, again at a decent each way price for Roger Varian.
Yeah, who's also had a good start. He had a nice winner earlier on today at Newmarket. She travelled nicely through that race at Newbury. That was won by Jumley, but as you said, the conditions just didn't suit her when the tips were down a bit. And she was also didn't go off on fancy. Looking at the result there, she went off 94 joint favourite, which goes to show, after one run against fillies with a bit more experience, that she's clearly well thought of. And I thought another interesting point was after Cachet winning yesterday at Newmarket in the Guineas trial there, I heard the connection saying that William Buick is going to be available for the Guineas, which I thought was very interesting, considering they look like they've got Godolphin a horse for possibly, if she was to win this, Wild Beauty for the Guineas. So if he's available for Cachet, what's happening to Wild Beauty? So I thought that was quite interesting. When I looked at her profile, perhaps they might go somewhere else. She's travelled abroad already. So like the guys, that kind of put me off her. And as you say, she's a little bit exposed compared to the others. I'm going to stick with Jumbly. I'm just having a quick look at the weather forecast, and I'm pleased to see that there is a little bit of rain at Newbury over the next couple of days. She's very well related. She's comes from a strong family, and this is, as Harry Charlton has said to me in interviews, the best of the lot. I'd like to see what size she is. She wasn't massive last year, so it'd be interesting to see how much she's grown and developed. But she created a massive impression to me when I saw her win at Kempton. And I'm just going to take a bit of a gamble on her being the best of this bunch. But in what might not be the most standout renewals of this race, you have to go back to Lahan, fourth in this race in 2000, who then went on to win the 1,000 guineas. So that just goes to show the record. But that's the Fred Darling Stakes. The second race of the day that we're going to look at is the Greenham Stakes over the 7 furlongs. That will take place at 3 o'clock. Another Guineas trial. We were hoping we were going to see Caribus for Godolphin line up in this race, but he's done a racecourse gallop instead, and he's going straight on to the 2,000 guineas without a prep run. So the quite remarkable Angel Bleu is currently, I'd imagine, going to be heading the betting. We're currently SBK without the prices. We're a day away from the final declarations, which we get tomorrow, but I imagine he will start off favourite Frankie Dettori booked as well. By Dark Angel out of a Galileo mare. Looks to me, James, on pedigree, he could stay a mile trip in time, but this 7 furlongs will be very much to his liking.
Yeah, I think he'll stay okay. He was a very tough 2-year-old. He actually backed up when he won the Vintage just 3 days after that defeat to New Science at Ascot and Listed Company. And he was tough, I think, when he won at France, his 2 Group 1s at the end of the season. He clearly excels when the ground is exceptionally testing, which puts the other horses to detriment, and they can't quite cope with those ground conditions. We saw the only time he really disappointed as such was when he ran behind Berkshire Shadow in the Coventry on quick ground, and he finished 13th on that occasion. I don't know whether he's got that scope. He ran at Leicester at the start of the season in April behind Gubas, and I just feel he's the type of horse that excels at 2. He might have a solid 3-year-old campaign, but he might not progress. That's a big concern for Perfect Power. Ardad surprised me by how successful he was as a stallion last year. Ardad himself did not train on at all from 2 to 3. And just looking at the horses he's had run this year, he's had 30 individual runners. He's only had 2 winners. One of those was a 2-year-old. That's very impressive for Amo Racing over in Ireland, Crispy Cat. And the other one was Salah, who's actually another Amo horse that moved over to Ireland from 2 to 3. So he's had 28 already run and not get off the mark. And I just worry how much the progeny will train on. So for me, it's a best watched for Perfect Power. A horse I absolutely loved last year was Lucelle, a typical son of Memas. He was compact, very laid back, looked very easy to deal with. It's a really easy ride. He just progressed, shocked him and winning at 28 to 1 on debut. Actually third to Angel Blur to Pontefract in what ended up to be a hot conditions before going on a bit of a roll. A little bit disappointing in the Champagne, but may have been the end of a long season. We didn't see him after that. But for me, he's going to make a great sire, Lucelle, and I hope he trains on, because like I said, I really liked his attitude, and he was where I was ending up. And in an open Greenham, I think there's loads to consider. We've got, again, for me, no potential superstar over the mile anyway, but there could be some nice types. And I thought Lucelle, for me, I'd just like to see him train on from 2 to 3 and boost his stallion prospects. So I think he'll be a good stallion in due course.
Yeah, I thought that perhaps they might just go for it and send him off to stud at 2 instead of 3. So I was quite pleased to really see him in training. But Richard Hannon has farmed this race in the past, shinned it. Barney Roy and his old man won it with Olympic glory as well. And he's also, importantly, Lucelle already won over the 7 furlongs. Really interesting insight from James there about the sire Ardad, Ross. What do you think about that in terms of he really got off the ground running and really impressed a lot of us who are interested in first season sires? But it is really about those 2 to 3 year olds, whether there are the likes of Ribchester, for example, who's the sire of Flaming Rib, who himself got better as he got older, and the Ardads who just might have just peaked at 2.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a concern. I think James is right in there's probably not a superstar over a mile in here. I think if there is a superstar in here, though, and he trains on, it's Perfect Power. I mean, he was really smart last year, and he showed Christophe Soumont suits him beautifully. Rides him with a sort of real sort of daring attitude, finds the gaps when he wants them, and always seems to have the horse to take the gaps when they appear. That to me suggests he's very classy. When he won the Morny in Deauville, Christophe Soumont in an interview said he was fairly confident he'd stay 7 furlongs. He wasn't so confident he'd stay a mile. That's the sort of knowledge of a professional that I certainly wouldn't argue against. I think if he stays the 7 furlongs, he's going to stay on good ground on a flat track like Newbury. So in a race that I'm keen to watch, less keen to bet in, Perfect Power would be my selection. And he's got a really unfashionable pedigree, really. Ardad, out of a mare, Sagely, was rated 85, was running on the all-weather and won a couple of times over 10 furlongs. And there's not really anything in the immediate family either. But the fact that she did stay 10 furlongs gives me a bit of hope that he might stay 7. I'd be keen to oppose Angel Blue. I think he's absolutely needs soft ground to be seen at his best. So at this time of the year, a lot of it's got to be taken on chance. Have they trained on? Are they going to step forward? If he does, I think he's the best horse in the race.
Yeah, interesting. I would agree with that. And I do think this race is going to massively cut up. As I said, we're recording on a Wednesday afternoon before we get the declarations, and you can look through, a lot of these aren't turning up. So I can't see there to be a huge amount. And I think process of elimination says that the likes of Angel Bleu won't necessarily love the ground. Garbas's form tailed off at the end of last season. Lucell's an interesting one. Certainly, if he can bounce back, he's been off for a long time. We're now going to have a look at the 1,000 guineas and the 2,000 guineas as a whole. We've had 2 trials this week in the shape of the Nell Gwyn and the Craven Stakes. We're going to start with the 1,000 guineas and how the shape of the market as it looks like now. In Spiral, the unbeaten daughter of Frankel, for Cheveley Park, John and Thady Gosden, Frankie Dettori. The hype horse is 5-2 currently. Tenebrism also unbeaten for Aidan O'Brien, 7-2. Discoveries 8-1, along with Tuesday, 10-1 for Homeless Songs, who we've already seen out. And there's also won a trial of sorts for Dermot Weld. And Malavath is 10-1, along with Zelly 2. And their bigger prices for the rest, including Cachet. 16-1, Ross, you can get for Cachet, who won the Nell Gwyn. What were your thoughts on that performance? Is she a 1,000 guineas type?
I think you'd have to say she's certainly got and this is going to sound bizarre, she's got a better chance having done that than you would have given her at the back end of a 2-year-old year. You know, she's clearly come forward again, and she stepped up all the way through last year. You'd think there's probably something a bit better than her in there, but she's proven that she'll stay. She's proven that she's trained on. She's clearly tough and hardy because she had a real campaign last year, ended up in America. Was unfortunate there. I think she's tough. I think she's got a chance, but whether she's quite classy enough to be thought of as a 1,000 guineas contender, I at this stage would probably say no. I think something better will come along.
Okay, so that's Cachet. There was a couple of other horses in behind her, including Hello You, who was the 3rd. She's still in the Guineas reckoning as well. James, from what you've seen from the 2-year-old from the fillies when they were 2-year-olds last year, who are you most excited to see turning into a 3-year-old and essentially as a 1,000 guineas candidate?
Well, there's one that we didn't really see very much, and that's Tenebrism, who won, I think, the opening 2-year-old race of the season at Naas pretty impressively on soft ground over 5, and then she had a setback, and it was effectively 6 months before we saw her back on the track, and that was beaten Flotus, where she absolutely took off up the standside rail, and that may have been a little bit of an advantage. She could have been a touch flattered, but against that, with her inexperience, doing that on just a second start, and what you could argue was effectively a first start, having had her debut so long ago compared to her rivals, I was seriously impressed by what we saw. In Spiral, she kept on doing the job. I was never massively impressed, but every single time she won. Prosperous Voyage, she beat that filly twice at Doncaster and Newmarket to end her season. Not the best filly in the world. She's a filly that can get black type, but I'm not quite sure she's actually over 100. Prosperous Voyage, and Rolling the Dice, who finished 3rd in the Mayhill. I saw that at Newbury, and she was a tiny little memas. So form-wise, I don't think there was a great deal of strength and depth to Inspiral, but against that, trained by Genius. And her pedigree looks like she'll improve a little bit from 2 to 3 as well, being a daughter of Frankel. I just felt out of 2 of them, I like Tenebrism going forward. And if the daughter Caravaggio, that's the question mark. Frankel will certainly stay up to 1.5 miles. Caravaggio's, will they stay further than Southern or even a mile? So that's the question mark pedigree-wise. But the way she hit the ground on the run to the line at Newmarket, I was impressed. She's out of a pivotal mare. I think there's hope, and Aidan O'Brien thinks there's hope as well. So Tenebrism is the one for me that I'm looking forward to seeing what she can do in the 1,000 guineas. Yeah,
fascinating when you read the quotes about Tenebrism before that win at Newmarket after that long layoff, that they were thinking of sending her to a 7 furlong race. She clearly has a lot of speed, and it is that question mark about whether she'll stay. It just always is with these horses. But I've read in his pre-season tour that he was Aidan O'Brien was very happy with how she galloped in front of horses in a piece of work at the Curragh for 7.5 furlongs, and she picked up well off of it. So that gives a good signal there. And also, don't you think, James, you've got to really respect the Aidan O'Brien record in this race? It's just ridiculous really when you look through it, and horses that sometimes not necessarily the favored ones, Mother Earth being one of them, Hermosa going all the way back, she was 14-1 as well. So is there anything to say that we haven't even got, because I agree about Tenebrism, that we might have been looking, we should be looking at a couple of these Aidan O'Brien fillies?
Well, Homecoming Queen is probably the classic example, who actually beat Inspiral's Dam Starscope. I think Starscope was placed behind Homecoming Queen in that 1,000 guineas a few years ago. One might pop up, and sometimes Aidan doesn't actually know which one it's going to be. Yeah, Starscope, she was second, beaten 9 lengths by Homecoming Queen at 33-1 in her 1,000 guineas back in 2012. Nothing stands out on paper to me, but I wouldn't ever rule out any of the Valladolid horses if some outsiders take part. And talking about the trip, the way Valladolid is, Aidan will have run her over a mile at home effectively, and have a pretty strong idea whether she'd stay. And I think he's confident that she will, even if it may not have been quite proper race pace. They've got such strength and depth that they can work them to a pretty high standard and have a pretty good idea what they're going to do and what they're going to achieve.
Yeah, the facilities there are just mind-blowing when you've had the privilege of being there, or even of hearing about it or seeing videos of it. They've just got every opportunities. They basically recreate Epsom as well for their Derby horses. Contrelli Chapel, one of them, who really disappointed in the Guineas trial at Leopardstown. I think she'd imagine she had an issue after that. I doubt she'll be taking place, but Tuesday's one of them for that team who made a really good impression in a maiden. How good she is, we'll go to see, but she is bred to be pretty good, being out of Lily Langtry and by Galileo, and that's the pedigree that just makes you mouthwater when you think about the 1,000 guineas. Ross, I know you love your pedigrees. Is that what looks to you as tailor-made 1,000 guineas filly?
Well, I mean, you have to say that the top two in the market look the two standouts, both in what they've done and on pedigree. I agree with James. It's a little bit, you feel a bit cruel really to sort of throw some stones at Inspiral in terms of an unbeaten filly, but you do have to question what she's beaten. And I would also have a slight reservation about the fact she was doing all of that over the trip of a mile as a 2-year-old. And I just wonder whether, as she goes into 3-year-old year, she's going to need 10 furlongs to be at her absolute best. Whereas Tenebrism has perhaps got a bit more scope for improvement going up in trip. Because James is right, she took off like a rocket up in the Cheveley Park up that rail. And you'd imagine if they'd have gone another furlong, she'd have been even further clear. In a press piece I saw, Aidan O'Brien shut someone down very quickly that suggested she might not stay. It would appear they have no concerns whatsoever that she'll stay. So who are we to argue? So for me, it would be Tenebrism against Inspiral. The one that I've liked all the way through her 2-year-old year, and I was desperate for them to step her up from 6 furlongs to 7, and it never happened, was Sandrine from the Andrew Balding yard. Now, she was well behind Tenebrism in the Cheveley Park, but she didn't get the run of the race. She was sort of posted a bit wide, and then the groups merged and she had to sort of fight to get a position. And by that time, Tenebrism had quite literally flown, but she stayed on really well to the line. Cheveley Park came at a time when Andrew Balding's horses perhaps weren't firing as they had at the start of the year. She's got a pedigree to make up into a miler on the dam side. I think she's interesting at a big price, albeit if Tenebrism stays, I think she'll be a couple of lengths clear of these at the line.
Okay, Sandrine 20-1. Must point out Tenebrism's Dam, Immortal Verse, the great Immortal Verse, who beat Goldacova in a Prix-Jacques Le Marois, chased home Frankel on occasions, was a miler. I just think she's got a perfect pedigree to suggest that she will be at her best at this trip, and her Dam just improved with time as well. I just loved her attitude to come back after a break at that age, to have a setback and to be so tough and genuine to run at a track like Newmarket, which can find fillies out at the end of the season. And she really caught my eye, and I really look forward to seeing her in the Guineas and at 7-2. I think she's a nice price as it stands. And the other thing must mention, John and Daly Gosden, we'll see how they get to by a couple of weeks' time, but I think their horse has just been needing the run a little bit. They've been quite keen. They had a nice winner of the Wood Ditton today, but I would, I don't know, and also their record maybe not as good as others, especially Aidan O'Brien in this either. So week on in spiral from Ross and James and I. Right, we'll head on to the Guineas, the 2000 Guineas, the big one. And wow, well, we've got a lot to discuss here, guys. The market leader as it stands is Native Trail, who's been cut from 7-4 to 6-4 for SBK off the back of his explosive win in the Craven, which I've been privileged enough to see in person. Caribus, his stablemate, is 7-2. Luxembourg for Aidan O'Brien is 9-2. Point Lonsdale, another one for Aidan O'Brien, is 8-1. And then 16-1 Perfect Power, 20 bigger the rest. Now, all talk is going to be about Native Trail now. His performance, Ross, was, as I said, explosive. He's interesting in that he's unusual and that he kind of hits a bit of a flat spot. And you think, are you going to pick up? Are you bit cooked? No, you're not at all. And it's really those last fractions in the last half a furlong where he really explodes. And that's what really took my breath away today. He's physically a really eye-catching, special-looking horse. And I think when Pinatobu, what we saw a couple of years ago, was the hype, this leading 2-year-old, and then he didn't really materialize into 3. What we've seen with Native Trail that he clearly has.
Yeah, he looked like a 3-mile chaser, didn't he? He's just a big, powerful galloping horse. And my reservation going into him as a 3-year-old was, how would he handle coming down into that dip and hitting those ridges, because sometimes these big, powerful horses can just be put out of balance by it. And truthfully, he just seemed to gallop through them. He at no point today looked anything other than comfortable. He's got a very nice, relaxed way of going now, having been quite keen in his first couple of starts. And okay, it probably wasn't a vintage race today, but he won it with any amount of ease. Charlie Appleby seems to think he'll come forward for it, which is probably a bit terrifying for everyone else. I think he's the standout. I would have him above Caribus, on terms of ability, and also I think he's an easier ride. I think he's perhaps not so dependent on a strong pace as Caribus is. I think Caribus needs a strong pace to run at, and he'll need to be delivered fairly late, because he has previously sort of got to the front and sort of stopped a little bit. So Native Trail, I would imagine, has got more adaptability in how the race is going to be run. Yes, Caribus has had a race course gallop, but James will perhaps tell us more, but I can't think there can be any substitute for going through another high quality race, and that little bit of experience it brings, confidence it gives William Buick. I think he's going to take a lot of beating. Luxembourg, I'm not all that in love with his head carriage, his pedigree by Camelot, out of a mare that's thrown 10 and 12 furlong horses. I think he's probably one for further down the line. And even then, he wins, but he just got this awkward head carriage that I personally just doesn't endear him to me. So I'd be a big fan of Native Trail. And then another one at a big price from Andrew Balding is a horse I loved last year, and I slightly followed him off the cliff and down to the bottom, is Berkshire Shadow. But I'm just hoping upon hope that Andrew Balding mentioned a couple of times last year that he wasn't a typical 2-year-old, and he was quite tall, quite leggy. And I think he'd perhaps gone a bit lean at the back end of the year. If he's grown into that nice leggy frame, I'd be really interested to see what he can come back and do as a 3-year-old, because I thought he had a super attitude last year. He's tough. He's got a bit of speed. He looks like he should stay further. And he's a big price now, having been much shorter through the early part of last year. So he'd interest me at a price.
66-1 is a pretty good price then for that. Whether he goes there, we'll see how it all shapes up for him. But he did begin off his 2-year-old campaign in a great way, and you'd imagine like 2-year-olds can do. They can suddenly get a bit weak, but I'd imagine he's done a good bit of strengthening up throughout the winter. So Berkshire Shadow at a big price. James, we'll come back to the Native Trail point, as I'm not surprised Ross was very taken by that performance. We've also heard lots of comments which have been really helpful from Charlie Appleby about these two horses, himself and Caribus. Native Trail, he said on the post-race interview today, which I managed to just catch, that Native Trail was about 95% there today, which, as you know, we were saying, probably is a bit frightening. What's he going to be at 100%? Kariba sounds like a bit of a work in progress, bit more of a long-term plan for him. Being by Dabawi, he's got the pedigree to possibly even be more of a Derby horse or more of just a later in the season horse. So he's kind of sort of gifting us with exactly what we want to hear in the confidence behind which selection we should go for as punters, don't you think?
Yeah, so yeah, that race was car. I'm not sure what horses he was with today, but I didn't think the Craven was a particularly great race today. And the two that followed him home, Yamal, Mark, we didn't have much control of, and all he was worried about was holding on to him at the back of the field. Jane's horse Claymore ran an absolute cracker, but was only having his second start and then was given a good positive ride by Adam Kirby. He was 4-1 on. I've only rated him 107, 110 for that performance today. And while he did everything right, he looked extremely easy. He settled, he relaxed, which is what he didn't do when he won the July track last year on his second start, where he nearly ran away with William Buick. I think he's grown up and developed over the winter. Caribbeus, for me, is a more explosive type, and I totally agree with Ross that he's a much harder ride, and the fact that William went too soon on him last year when Royal Patrons caught him on the line. But I was impressed with the fact that they took him back 2 weeks later and he backed it up. I would love to have seen him in a trial to know exactly, but it may be that he's a little bit too fiery, and that's why they haven't decided to go for a trial, because he stretched clear of his two horses today in his bit of work at 9 o'clock. And looking at the way Native Trail wasn't blowing when he came in, I don't think Native Trail had a particularly hard race today either. So while normally I'd much rather race in a racehorse gallop, I think Native Trail was effectively, for him, against that opposition, it was only a bit of work. And once William got him going, because he did take a while to pick up, he was off to Prado for a fair way. He just disappeared. But King Max, and he had a mark of 86, which I'm racing and probably upset a little bit. Star of India was 1 from 1. So that Craven, no one that had a horse which you could really rate and know exactly when they run to. None of those turned up today. So I just put a few question marks on the form, and I'm still with Caribbeus. I was so impressed with the turn of foot. I imagine James Doyle will ride. I can't imagine William's going to get off Native Trail. He's just going to have to time it right, and it may well be that the uncomplicated Native Trail season come out on top. But of the two, I do like Caribbeus. I think he might be the better one longer term. I 100% agree with Ross about Luxembourg. Camelot, no, thank you. Not for me. We've had one in the yard, and it barely went round the gallops. It had no enthusiasm for life whatsoever, and he's a rare standout for Camelot in the UK in particular, and Cornwall need him to do well, but there's a few question marks there about Camelot as a sire, and he may be too slow compared to Native Trail and Caribbeus. They've both shown that they've got that turn of foot. Against that, it's still an exciting 2,000 guineas, because they're 3 very, very nice horses, and they've done exactly what you want them to do ultimately.
Yeah, the record, Charlie Appleby's, it's mad to think as this is the only, I think it's the only classic he hasn't won, the 2,000 guineas, and he's had options in the past. As we mentioned, Pinatubo came into it with all the weight on his shoulders and just wasn't. He just wasn't the 3-year-old that he was. He wasn't as good a 3-year-old as he was as a 2-year-old. So do you think that Caribbeus will be there where they want him? Because as I said, reading through the lines, even after that racecourse gallop, they said, there's still a bit of work to do. Do you think that he will be able to beat Native Trail then?
Pre-season, I'm not going to change my mind now. You are reading between the lines. You're not. You don't know exactly what the lads are saying. He was mentioning a trial at the start of the year, and then obviously he hasn't gone for a trial, so that has to be a little bit negative. But I can't oppose him now and then see him go flying by Native Trail at the end, because ultimately for me, Native Trail did what he should have done today. I wasn't particularly blown away by it. He just looked uncomplicated and pretty easy. But back to Charlie Appleby, I think he's a different trainer. In the last couple of years, he's just seems to have the full faith of Sheikh Mohammed and his team, and it's been showing that there's not really been a horse that I think should have won a 2,000 guineas as such that he's had in his care. And last year, obviously the 2 stars, Hurricane and Nadia, were more middle distance types that weren't 1,000 guineas type, 2,000 guineas types. The Master of the Seas wasn't far away anyway. And he came back and won nicely, won the Earl of Sefton. So the team are absolutely flying. You couldn't want them in any better form. Yeah, it's going to be a good one though, and it's great that they're happy for the two to run together, because what you wouldn't want to see is one disappear off to France you'd like them both to take part, and they do seem to be quite happy. We've seen that with Adiar and Hurricane Lane last season, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, they really do. They've been buying horses, I think, especially for this in mind, because as you say, they might not have had Guineas types in the past, but Native Trail was bought as a breezer, ran as a very good 2-year-old, but also possibly with the idea that he could turn into more of a out and out miler as opposed to a 10 furlong, 1.5 mile horse, which some of them traditionally have been that as homebreds as well. So Native Trail, I can't get away from. I thought it was magic today. Yes, possibly not the best of races, but he made it. I think he's like lazy horse as well, and he didn't need to do his best work. He was only doing enough late on as well, which I always really like. So I'm pretty confident with him at 6-4. But James will stick to his guns.
You're not going to sway. You're not going to sway me.
Flip-flop. He does not
flip-flopping, definitely not.
And that we appreciate that. And I think that is very admirable. He's sticking to Cleveland. But look, the interesting to see when we get to 6 months' time where these horses are, because it could be a bit like Hurricane Lane, who I always thought was going to get better as the season got on, and that might be what Caribus will be. But a really exciting time of year in terms of the flat season and what we've got to look forward to and how these horses shape up. So that is our look at the 1,000 and 2,000 guineas. Before I let you guys go, we've got plenty of racing this weekend. Ross is delighted that there's still jump action, and we're still holding on to every inch of it until at least the end of the month. And we'll be reviewing and previewing plenty of more jumps racing as it comes. But we're going to take a nap and next best from both Ross and James, and I'll have my selections as well. And Ross, I think you've got a couple of jumpers for us.
I have, kicking and screaming before you drag me away from the jumping. And it's quite a nice card actually from Haydock to end their jump season. The nap comes in the 352, the John Joe O'Neill train, Courts de Rue. He loves good ground. He's only a pound above his last winning mark. I think he's obviously had a few training issues, but I think they put him away for the winter because he just cannot do it on soft ground. I think this will have been the target, and I expect him to go very well. And then the next best is Undulissiniere for Fergal O'Brien. She's now down to a mark that she won off over hurdles. She wasn't given a hard time when she was beaten last time at Leicester. She's another one that will the quicker the ground, the better for her. And I could well see this as being her end of season target, perhaps for going on over the summer. But this is a nice little pot, and I think she'll take a bit of beating as well.
Okay, so jumps fans, we always like to give you, endeavour to give you as much as we can from Ross. He loves it. That's Courts de Rue in the 352 at Haydock and Undulissiniere in the 501 at Haydock. Thanks for that. And to James, where are you going?
Yeah, I'm staying away from the jumps. I've got Exeter tomorrow, and that's nearly the end for me as regards to the UK jump racing. But Tyrion C, who, for those that have been keeping an eye on Neil Webber, he's looked an absolute machine at Newcastle. But Connection's got the tactics completely and utterly wrong at Kempton on a tight 10 furlong track. He had still won, and for some stupid reason, they decided to get a lead, and they got pinned in behind a 40-1 shot. Baldemero on the other side meant he couldn't get out, and it was a bit of a horror show. And I say jockey Jack Mitchell would have got a bit of the blame, but for me, that should have been the Connections realised that was likely to happen, and they should let him stride on because he hadn't looked too keen early on. But he goes back to Newcastle. He goes for the Easter Classic. It doesn't look a particularly strong contest. They've switched from the mile. Andrea Azzani gets on board, and he could be a very, very nice horse. And I do think back at Newcastle in a weak race for the money, it's probably the worst renewal with the Easter Classic. He's got a very, very good chance, and it's a TC odds-on selection as he's away, so I thought I'd honour him. And at Newbury, I quite like Jane Chabelheim's filly, Heat of the Moment. Each way, Angle's my next best because she's 1 from 1. We saw Claymore come second for the yard in the Craven behind Native Trail today. He ran an absolute stormer. And we saw Saffron Beach that Jane, when she's got a potential group filly on her hands, she does the job. So Heat of the Moment each way in the Fred Darling.
Brilliant. Well, as we said, there's plenty of racing throughout the weekend, and James has touched on Newcastle. We've got all-weather championship finals, so there's plenty to look forward to. It is Easter weekend. Forget about that. There's lots going on. So Tyrrhenian Sea, I was there to see that. Gosh, it was a horror show. And that in a track without that cutaway, you can get into all sorts of problems. But back at Newcastle, I think that's a really nice selection. 4:45 and heat of the moment. My best bet is going to come the 4 o'clock at Lingfield again, all-weather championships final day. Proclaimer has been on an absolute roll for Julie Camacho, and the owners group comes into this race under a penalty. Oisin McSweeney gets on so well with this horse, has done plenty of winning around Kempton, but also has got winning form at other tracks, including Newcastle as well. Lingfield is one that he hasn't gone to yet, so we'll see how it pans out for him, but he's in brilliant form, and I have a lot of admiration for this horse that likes to go out in front, make call, and doesn't like any horses passing him. So Proclaimer for me in the 4 o'clock. My next best is at Lingfield as well in the 1:15. This is Red Flyer in the Apprentice all-weather championship final, Apprentice handicap, the all-weather Vars, I should call it. Red Flyer was a really good pickup by John Best and Karen Jewell from the Tom Ward yard. Won a couple of times at Kempton and Lingfield, and then was really not disgraced when beaten last time out at Wolverhampton. Only up a couple of pounds for that result, but I still think they're on the right side of the handicapper with this horse. Saffy Osborne's but nice jockey booking, and I think he can go well too. So plenty of options for you if you're looking for some bets this Easter weekend. And we've got an offer for new customers. If you deposit £10, you get £30 in free bets for all those selections. Obviously, T's and C's always apply. But thanks to Ross and to James. A very happy Easter to you all. Enjoy the Easter weekend. Enjoy all the racing, because there's plenty to enjoy. And make sure to like and subscribe. And we'll be back again for another SBK Betting Podcast next week.